Hi, welcome to Women's Fiction Day. I'm Mary Helen Sheriff, and I'm here to talk with Barbara Lynn Probst about setting and how it can do double or sometimes even triple duty. In order to do that, I need to get Barbara on here, and I'm going to work on that right now. This is my first live IG video, so bear with me as I attempt to do this.
We are. No,
Hey, did we do it?
we did it. I'm getting so good at this now.
I
I
feel
did
like a
this.
technical genius.
I know. First I did this like last year. I was just a complete nervous wreck. It was
I
just
know, I
so
know.
and it's easy, right?
It's easy. It's easy. So, very fun. Well,
Yeah.
thanks for coming and doing this with me today. This will be fun.
Yes. Good. Absolutely. So, um, and yet you can see me okay. The light's all right.
Yep.
Oh, look at you. You got that whole poster. That is pretty cool.
Yeah, fancy,
Oh,
huh?
I've actually got my Georgia O'Keeffe painting on the
Oh,
wall.
there
But
you go. Just
yeah,
perfect for Queen of the Owls.
that's right. That's right. Actually, I'm going to talk about both books since really we're talking about women's fiction. We're not here to, you know, talk about our books specifically as much as using them as the frame for talking about something that's relevant for women's fiction authors. So I get to use examples from both of my books, which is this. Just hold them up here because
Perfect.
they're just like we have the best cover designer at She Writes Press. Julie Metz is just a complete genius. So, but yeah, so Mary and I kind of know each other from She Writes Press, which is the kick-ass women's press by and for and about women. So it's perfect. It's perfect for today.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And I guess we also know each other through Women's Fiction Writers Association, who I think is sort of the sponsor of Women's Fiction Day in general.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes. So wonderful. Well, Barbara, let's start. Maybe you could just give us a quick, like, little intro to both of your books so we have some context for when you're talking about them.
Right. Well, the two books actually share a kind of theme about how art, in Queen of the Owls, it's photography, painting, and The Sound Between the Notes, it's music, how art can help to make us more whole and human. So it's like I'm not an artist and you don't have to be a pianist to read the book, but it's the frame for a woman's journey to a more uh, integrated, authentic self, which is really the essence of women's fiction.
Yeah, it's funny that that's your big theme in both your books. My novel is Boop and Eve's Road Trip, and Eve is a fashion designer. And part of her journey to a more authentic self is through her art in terms of fashion design. So, kind of some similar themes there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because we use a frame that gives a lot of possibility, but the story's not about fashion or it's not about the piano, but that's the frame. So, when we started talking about this notion of setting, yesterday, Mary and I had our own little conversation, and it was so cool to discover how much more layered it is than I had even like I realized I do things that I hadn't made explicit to myself about using many bits of setting in all kinds of cool ways. So we're excited to talk about this with each other and right now. So,
Yeah. Yeah, so bear with us. But tell us, maybe we should start by talking about, like, what do people normally think of when they think of setting? And then we can kind of talk about what else you can think of.
that's a great way. Usually, I mean, it's funny because um, I've done research with, we're asking readers, what do you like about books? And well, I hate a lot of description. Like that is not the style of contemporary writing.
Sure.
People like skip the description because it doesn't have a story related meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the old vision of setting as being description of, a room or a cottage or a forest or something. And it's not interesting in a way because it's not feeding, adding to the story. So we're not talking about that at all. And there's so much more to this. So I want to give a little shout out to women's fiction guru and former guiding scribe Catherine Kraft, who was one of my mentors for Queen of the Owls, which actually was born in her living room.
Cool.
And I think it's Catherine pointed out to me, or maybe it just came up in one of the class meetings, that I had an awful lot of scenes set like at the dinner table or over a cup of coffee. And that may be what I do in my life, but it's not actually something to read about. So I had this idea to take, because of Catherine, to take a very important scene in the book. Well, not to get into a lot about the story itself, but just enough for you to know, where the protagonist is sort of being, I want to say seduced, although it's not about sex, by this very charismatic photographer. And she's also a mom of small children. So I had this idea to have, the coffee shop was closed. So they start taking a walk down the street and they come upon an empty children's playground because it's in the evening. And having this sort of seductively-ish scene in this incongruous setting of the innocence of the children's playground. And of course, then she goes on the swings and he pushes her. You know when someone pulls you back and then they let you go? And she abandons herself to this, which he has set in motion. And you get higher and higher, and you're afraid you're going to go over the top. So suddenly the setting with these swings opened up so many more layers of what this scene could be about emotionally, and in terms of the character. Like, I never would have thought of that if I hadn't suddenly put the scene in this completely wacko, or unplanned,
Right.
setting.
Right. Yeah, it
You,
is. Yeah, it's
yeah,
totally interesting how you can move a scene from somewhere and it can take on a whole nother layer of meaning and charge, and even the setting can cause like conflict, which can add to the scene and move the direction of the motion of the scene too. I have a scene where Eve is in college and she is in her biology lab, and she is a very shy, introverted young lady, and she has a crush on her lab partner and has sort of built herself up that today is the day that she's going to ask him out. The problem is that they're dissecting a pig and she is nauseous and grossed out, and she has decided not to wear the mask she would normally wear because she put all her makeup on and like wanted to look super pretty for the day that she has the guts to ask him out. And so the whole time her stomach is a flutter because she's nervous, but it's also a flutter because she is completely grossed out by the lab. And then at the same time, you have the lab partner who has no idea what's going on because he's a typical guy. and he's just dissecting the pig, like very like doing the things the lab is saying to do. And she's like trying to be cool and flirtatious. And it kind of adds a neat little conflict to the setting and makes her struggle even more real. So just kind of another way to, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry. So also, what you're making me also remember that how, if you have a setting that maybe, oh, my phone is ringing, just, we're going to ignore it. Oh, it's my
Perfect.
kid. Oh my God. Oh, well, I told him, I said, don't call me between 11 and 11:30. So what is it, 11:05?
Probably. Perfect time to call then.
This is just life, right? We're just blocking him out. And setting, I'm in my home. Anyway, the other thing I was thinking about is you can take a setting that is actually not particularly unusual, like the way with the children's playground one. It's a predictable setting, but by having the character return to it at different points in the story, the setting takes on a meaning. And I can think, for whatever reason, I'm thinking of examples from Queen of the Owls today, although I'm really trying to highlight the other books. But I'm going to do with whatever comes up. But anyway, so in Queen of the Owls, there's The protagonist is a doctoral student. And so there's a scene where she um, encounters this big, guru professor, feminist professor who's like her icon, um, in the library, which is a place you would imagine, only she encounters her in the restroom washing their hands. So already it's an intimate part of the library. So it's where her academic self lives, but suddenly it's in a human part. Okay, and the mentor lady offers a connection, a kind of personal. Okay, later in the book, when various things happen, she encounters the same woman in the library, and the woman snubs her because of what she's done. The woman cannot forgive. So returning to that setting, which was the site of their first, and by connecting with her, she was going to open a whole career possibility. When she returns there, the career possibility is DOA. It's over.
Right.
So by having characters come back. So did you have anything like that in your book?
Yeah, I had well, they're on a road trip, so they go lots of places. But I did have Eve started off at school at the beach, and one of the very early scenes in the book, it's very short. It's like a scene that's like a couple paragraphs, but she's sitting on the beach and she's super depressed, and she's thinking like, gosh, I really wouldn't mind if I went in that water and drowned. And so that's sort of her starting place when the journey takes off. But then the next time she arrives at a beach, it's a different beach, and she has started her healing process and is there with a boy, learning to surf, kind of like breaking out of her mold, doing something that's scary and
Yeah,
hard, and riding the waves, and
that's
has
great.
this feeling
Great.
of exhilaration. And so you can see, like, gosh, the last time we were at the beach, where she was and where she is now.
That's so cool. That the same water is like, I can be obliterated in the water, or I can ride on top of it.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
very cool. And I think we feel these, even though maybe you didn't conceptualize what I just said, but you felt it by some relationship to the beach that came into the book in a very organic way. And it's very cool. So these are all ways that setting evokes or illustrates something that's changed in the character, for sure. There's also, I was thinking about how, like, if you and I were in the same park, we would notice different things,
Mm-hmm.
and we would think about those things in different ways. So you can have two characters in the same place, but the different perceptions are
Yeah.
telling you something about. So I just thought of an example from the
Okay.
selfie for the notes. There we go. My little neglected second child.
Oh, good.
But so in this one, the protagonist is a musician. She's a creative, and her husband is a scientist. So of course they're going to look at the world differently. So they're out on the deck, and she sees that the sun is going, or the light is changing, because that's what, and she says, "Oh, isn't it great? The sun's come out from behind the cloud." And he says, "No, the sun hasn't come out from behind the cloud. The cloud moved," which is literally true, which is actually something my partner always reminds me of. He's like a scientist, but he's a lawyer. Same thing. Anyway, so there are different takes on this and what happened and what's happening in the sky.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us something about them. And of course, this image of how the clouds have to get out of the way then recurs in the book. And so that when it recurs, we're pinged back to this conversation with her husband, just by that one little descriptive detail, which occurred earlier in the book. So, when I first wrote that little bit, I didn't think, oh, I'm going to use this later, but it was there, and it came back to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which is kind of cool. So there's the details
Right.
within this. There's what is the setting, whether it's the beach or the park.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's the specific details
Within the setting. Yeah. I had a writing instructor at one point. I had written a scene that I thought was just brilliant. And and I had gone through and like, what are they doing? What's around them? Like, really painted the picture and da 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 da. And he was like, okay, well, like, I can tell you can write, but I'm wondering why you're telling me what this table looks like. What is the point? And I think that gets to the main point of it. Like, it hadn't even occurred to me that I wasn't just supposed to paint the picture and make it feel real. Like, the table was supposed to have a meaning, which is something I did sometimes struggle with when I was writing the road trip, because sometimes I am capturing a detail of a real place that is perhaps not loaded in meaning, but like this kind of like small detail of this real place that I'm going to include in there anyway, because I think it like adds some sort of little detail.
Well, it's also atmosphere. It's
right.
A sense, and that's the other thing I think that you're alluding to, that what people don't like reading 10 pages of description, but a few things that are carefully selected that create a kind of mood or suggestive. It's not heavy. It's not like everything is a big symbol of like, maternal love or the human existence or something, but just enough sensory detail that you can feel like you're there. And it can be a smell. It can be a sound. It can be something small.
Yeah, that's just, you just made me think of, in the very first scene in my book, it's Christmas, and Boop, the grandmother, has made gingerbread cookies from her, or actually it was Eve made the gingerbread cookies. Boop made them. I'm getting all confused on the spot. All right, Boop made the gingerbread cookies.
It's almost lunchtime, Mary.
Yeah, I am hungry. From a family recipe, and they burnt. So you have this smell of burnt gingerbread cookies kind of permeating this Christmas dinner that it's not going particularly well. It's a very tension-filled meal. So you have kind of the contrast between what Christmas is supposed to be, what gingerbread cookies are supposed to be, and then you've got the smell of not of the, you've got a hint of the nice gingerbread with the burn kind of tinging it, and that sort of being, a way to use smell to evoke some setting and
yeah, that's great. That is so great. And I think just so many times it's one or two details, like for example, in The Sound Between the Notes. So she goes in many scenes to a small town in Texas, which is the story about finding her birth family. The protagonist is a pianist, but she's adopted. So that's a whole other part of it. So a lot of the scenes are set in Texas. And I wanted to show something about this family. They're from a different culture than she was raised in. But her birth grandmother has a certain kind of pride in like, so at the Formica kitchen table, there's a little wire basket full of supermarket coupons and stuff like that. I can see it. I can see it on my ex-mother-in-law's table in Ohio, but it was representative of a certain personality, a certain way of, I'm going to save every 20 cents I can, but it's not, something is evoked by this little basket full of supermarket coupons. I didn't have to describe the whole room.
Right. And
we see it. It. And then there's also a scene. I'm suddenly remembering all this stuff. But when you start thinking about it, you realize how important it is when Susanna, the protagonist, is taking a walk in the bayou with her step aunt, half aunt, whatever she is, and there's the sounds of the screeching of the birds and stuff. And then at a certain moment, when she hears something that she never expected to hear, the place goes silent.
So food,
you feel it. And the fact that this scene happens in a bayou, there's something about the wildness, that it's not under control, it's not really domesticated, adds to the sense of there's something that's just, again, she's not in control of the conversation. I didn't realize how smart I was. I didn't know that. But I think if sometimes our intuition actually is guiding us, and also less is more, as you're
Yes,
saying.
yes, yes, yes,
So
yeah.
um, we're also so talking. I'm looking at my little
Oh.
notes. We're talking. We're also talking again about the characters interacting with the setting. What does she touch, pick up, look at?
Right. Yeah, I have a scene where Boop and Eve stop at the Fountain of Youth, which is in St. Augustine, Florida. And it's kind of this, it's a real place. It's like a little kitschy tourist trap. But it's also quite beautiful. There are peacocks running around. And anyway, it's there's this neat moment where they get to taste samples from the Fountain of Youth, and Eve is looking at their hands as they kind of do a cheers, and looking at her grandmother's arthritic, wrinkled 80-year-old hand and her own hand. And it just kind of brings to her all of this feeling of like, my time with my grandmother is limited. And what must it be like to be old and to know that your time on earth is limited? And so they end up kind of having a conversation about it. And Boop says, hey, I might not have the body I once did, but my sense of peace and well-being is so much better than it was when I was younger. I would trade my soul for my body any day. But it starts with that like moment of that's those two hands together that sort of brings up the conversation.
Well, exactly. That's like a perfect example. And it's funny because there's something like that in my book as well with in Susanna as, okay, there's so many parts to this. I'm going to spoil the whole book if you have. But anyway, she discovers that she has a hand disease, which is hereditary. So that's the link with the birth family and the piano. Okay.
Got it.
And she's visiting with her father, and we're in the place where he's living, which is a pretty elegant, like a senior residence, which actually was modeled after where my parents used to live. I mean, I saw it in my mind's eye, and then I could select details from what I actually remember.
Right.
Anyway, so and she sees her father's hands with the age spots and shaking a little, and she thinks, well, both of our hands are changing whether we want them to or not. So you don't want to overdo it and over explain, giving the reader the respect for figuring it out herself, but just this image, and then you're evoking the visual image so that the reader is right there in scene, pulls the reader in and out of the. You don't want the reader to be living in the protagonist's head. You want her to be right in the room. These little things like that can really embody. I think of it as embodied writing, like that. So description that is disembodied, that is from a distance, like exactly like you're in an airplane taking one of those aerial photographs, is not interesting. But description that is small and is close up and embodies the what's happening, I think is so effective. And it's just actually a change in how the writing styles from like 100 years ago. And so, what we call deep POV, I actually, sometimes I hate stuff that because it's all like emotional, like hyperventilating. And that is telling. But by having these little descriptive details, it is inviting the reader in. So it's really a powerful writerly tool.
Yeah.
And I never thought about it till we decided to have this conversation.
Yeah. I think a lot of it comes out in revision too. Like, I'm not sure that in my first draft some of these little details existed, but as you dig deeper and add layers and context to your scenes, that's the perfect time to do that, to add those little details that are telling of character and telling of plot and symbolism and things like that. That's when you kind of do that.
Well, it's also taking away, because you might have too much and you just need to find the one thing that's going to create that, the one detail. But I also want to go back again to what we started with, which was picking a setting that seems surprising or doesn't seem like it would fit the scene. But
Mm-hmm.
by placing it in a different place, not at, not at the kitchen table. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
my first terrible manuscript, which will never see the light of day, thank God. You know how many scenes were like on the phone,
Oh, right.
disembodied on the phone.
Yeah.
You can have a couple if it's necessary for it to, for it to be,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
like I didn't know enough um to realize how much richer it is if you know where this conversation is happening. Um, again, it can be, and again, in Queen of the Owls, there's a scene in the Botanic Garden
Mm-hmm.
that, because the protagonist is studying Georgia O'Keeffe's Hawaii paintings, and she goes, for various reasons, she wants to get out of the library and go somewhere where it's just living. And she goes to the Botanic Garden on campus, which actually was modeled after the university where I taught. So anyone who knows, this is a dead giveaway. But anyway, and so the steam, the mist, the orchids.
Mm-hmm.
She's someone who is very much living in her mind. So the sensuality of the scene is already doing something that you don't have to tell the reader that this is a woman who's cut off from her body. The setting is constantly allowing us to know that, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
Very cool. Very cool.
so how are we doing on time, Mary? I don't
I
have
was
my.
just gonna say, I think you're at about that time where we should be wrapping it up. I can say that I have read your Queen of the Owls book and quite enjoyed it. So anyone out there who's listening, you guys should give it a read.
Thank you.
I haven't had a chance to read your second book yet, but I hope to.
Thank you.
Um, and hopefully you guys got some things to think about with your own manuscript of ways to maybe interact with your setting a little bit more deeply.
Yeah, this is just, I really appreciated this conversation so much, Mary, because it's not something we talk about. We talk about goals and stakes and all of that, but there's a lot more to the craft.
Yeah, I
That we,
think setting is something they talk about a lot in like science fiction and fantasy books, but women's fiction kind of ignores that conversation. And it's not that we don't have them, but I think maybe we think it's secondary, and I'm not sure it should be.
but it's really interesting because there's so much emphasis on what's happening internally,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
emotional turning points, but where is it happening? It's not happening in the ether.
right.
It's, and so this may be, I hope for some of people listening, this has been as useful as it's been for me to really think about this much more creatively. So
Yeah.
thank you for such a great conversation, Mary.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Me too.
And
So,
thanks everyone who gave it a listen. And I'm going to try to figure out how to turn it off.
just shut down your phone. Just
There you go. That'll do it. All right.
and
Bye.
bye bye. Thank you again. Bye bye, everybody.